First story. I never thought a routine Saturday morning would turn into a wild chase through town. My name's Jake, I'm 28, and I live in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The kind where everyone nods politely but keeps to themselves. That was until I got to know Mr. Riley. Mr. Riley is the elderly guy living a few doors down. He's in his late 70s, a widower, and most of the neighborhood helps him out from time to time. He's not particularly chatty, but he's got this old-school charm. I'd wave at him when I jogged past his house, but we didn't really talk until last weekend. I was having my morning coffee when Mr. Riley knocked on my door. I was surprised, he'd never come over before. "Jake," he said, "I've got a bit of a favor to ask." His voice was gruff but gentle, the kind of voice you'd trust without a second thought. Apparently, his car had broken down at the grocery store parking lot a few blocks away. He didn't want to call a tow truck for something so minor, and he asked if I could give him a lift to pick up some supplies from the store, then help him jump-start the car. It seemed like a small favor. I grabbed my car keys and we headed to the store. It took us all of 5 minutes to get there. I waited in the parking lot while Mr. Riley went inside for his groceries. I was scrolling through my phone, not thinking much of it, when Mr. Riley came running out of the store. And I mean running. This old guy was moving faster than I thought possible. Behind him, 2 guys in hoodies were chasing him, and they didn't look friendly. "Start the car, Jake," he shouted, waving his arm frantically. I didn't ask questions. I fired up the engine just as Mr. Riley threw himself into the passenger seat. The 2 guys in hoodies were still closing in, and I floored the gas. "What the hell is going on?" I yelled, heart pounding as we sped out of the parking lot. Mr. Riley didn't answer right away. He was catching his breath, staring straight ahead as if trying to focus on something other than the guys who were, I kid you not, jumping into their own car to follow us. Mr. Riley finally spoke after a few moments. "Those punks are after my medication." Medication? This didn't make any sense. "What kind of medication are we talking about, Mr. Riley?" I asked, glancing in the rearview mirror. The car chasing us wasn't too far behind, weaving through traffic like something out of a bad action movie. "Doesn't matter," he snapped, his voice sharp for the first time since I'd met him. "Just drive." So, I did. I took every turn I could think of, trying to lose the car behind us. My mind was racing, trying to piece together what the hell I had just gotten myself into. Here I was, speeding through suburban streets with an elderly neighbor who was apparently on the run from 2 thugs. My Saturday had taken a turn for the bizarre. We hit the main road, and I figured I had one shot to lose them, head towards the freeway. It's a bit risky, but I didn't know what else to do. Mr. Riley wasn't exactly forthcoming with information, and I wasn't keen on getting caught by whatever mess he was tangled up in. As we merged onto the freeway, I looked over at Mr. Riley. "You're going to have to give me something, man. I need to know what's going on." He sighed, rubbing his temple like he was exhausted. "Look, those 2 back there, they're small-time crooks. They've been tailing me for a week. They think I'm holding something valuable, something they can sell. But all I've got is my heart meds." That didn't seem like a good enough reason for 2 guys to chase down a senior citizen, but I didn't have time to press him for more details. The car behind us was still tailing, but they were losing ground as I sped up. After what felt like hours, but was probably just 15 minutes, I finally managed to lose them by taking an exit onto a narrow side street, winding through an unfamiliar part of town. We slowed down, and I pulled into a parking lot of some random strip mall, heart still pounding. Mr. Riley sat quietly for a moment before he turned to me, a strange smile creeping across his face. "Good driving, kid. You've got a real knack for this." I stared at him, half expecting some kind of explanation, but instead, he opened the door, stepped out, and adjusted his jacket like nothing had happened. "I owe you one, Jake," he said. "Maybe next time I'll explain the whole story." And just like that, he walked off into the strip mall, leaving me sitting in my car, confused and more than a little rattled. I watched him go, wondering what kind of world Mr. Riley was living in that led to random parking lot chases with shady characters. I never did get the full story from him. The next time I saw Mr. Riley, he acted like nothing was out of the ordinary. We went back to our usual nods and small talk. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Mr. Riley than the quiet, old man facade. And honestly, I'm not sure I want to know what it is. That Saturday was enough excitement for me. I've avoided any favors since then. Second story. Hey, Reddit. I've been lurking here for a while, reading everyone's crazy stories, and I guess it's my turn to share something that happened to me. My name's Sarah, I'm 32, and I work as a marketing analyst for a mid-sized company. The place is your typical office environment, cubicles, coffee machines, and a whole lot of corporate politics. Nothing too thrilling ever really happens. At least, that's what I thought until this one day when everything went sideways. It all started innocently enough. I was given a new assignment to analyze some market data for a client we had recently signed. The task was straightforward: pull the numbers, identify trends, create a presentation, and hand it over to my boss. Easy, right? Except, I noticed something odd. The client's financials didn't add up. Now, I've been doing this job long enough to spot when something's off, and this data looked really suspicious. The revenue figures were too high compared to industry benchmarks, almost inflated to the point where they seemed, well, fake. But I'm not an auditor, so I figured I'd just flag it to my boss, Greg, and let him deal with it. Greg, by the way, is a guy in his early 40s, slick and polished, always making sure everyone knows he's climbing the corporate ladder. He's not exactly the most approachable person, but I didn't think twice about emailing him with my findings. I just wanted to get on with the rest of my day. A couple of hours later, Greg called me into his office. His tone was different, tight, almost like he was forcing himself to sound casual. "Sarah, I went through the data you flagged," he said, not looking me in the eye. "It's nothing to worry about. Just some discrepancies on the client's end. I'll handle it." I nodded, but something didn't sit right with me. His response was too quick, too rehearsed. And the way he shifted in his seat? It was like he was hiding something. But I let it go. It wasn't my place to dig deeper, and frankly, I had other projects to focus on. That evening, just as I was packing up to leave, I noticed an email pop up in my inbox. It was from an anonymous account with no subject line. Normally, I'd ignore something like that, but curiosity got the better of me. I clicked it open, and what I saw made my heart race. It was a string of internal emails between Greg and a few other high-level people in the company. And it wasn't just boring office talk. The emails detailed a scheme they had been running to inflate the numbers on certain client accounts. The purpose? To boost their department's performance metrics and, in turn, their bonuses. I wasn't sure how they pulled it off, but it was clear they had been cooking the books for months, if not longer. I sat there, staring at my screen in disbelief. Greg, Mr. Corporate Climber himself, was involved in some serious fraud. And somehow, by sheer accident, I had stumbled onto it. My first instinct was to delete the email and pretend I had never seen it. But then another thought crept into my head: what if they knew I saw it? I felt my pulse quicken. What if Greg had sent this to me as a warning? Or worse, what if someone was setting me up as the fall guy, or fall girl, in this case? I started to panic, my mind racing with 1,000 worst-case scenarios. What should I do? Report it? Keep quiet? Confront Greg? I decided I needed to talk to someone, but I couldn't go to HR just yet. HR always protects the company first, and I wasn't about to get tangled up in a corporate scandal without a plan. So I reached out to my friend, Karen, who worked in legal for a different company. She's the only person I trust with something like this. We met up after work at a quiet cafe. I laid everything out for her: the suspicious numbers, the shady emails, Greg's odd behavior. Karen listened carefully, sipping her coffee, her face unreadable. "This is serious, Sarah," she said finally. If those emails are real, they're committing fraud, and you've got the evidence. But you need to be careful. If they think you're onto them, they might try to pin it on you." Her words didn't exactly calm me down. I felt like I was walking on a tightrope. One wrong step and I could fall into a mess I had no business being part of. "So, what do I do?" I asked. Karen suggested I gather as much evidence as I could without raising any alarms. "You need to cover yourself first," she said. "Make copies of everything, keep a paper trail, and don't tell anyone at work what you know, not yet." That night, I stayed up late combing through my company email, making sure I hadn't missed anything. I backed up all the suspicious emails, saved them to a flash drive, and even printed out hard copies just in case. My stomach was in knots the entire time. I felt like I was in some kind of corporate espionage thriller, except I didn't want any part of it. The next few days at work were tense. I avoided Greg as much as possible, but I could feel his eyes on me during meetings. He was watching, waiting for any sign that I might betray him. I didn't give him the satisfaction. I kept my head down, did my job, and acted like nothing was wrong. But I couldn't keep this to myself forever. After a week of playing it cool, I decided to anonymously report the fraud through the company's internal whistleblower hotline. I wasn't sure what would happen after that, but I knew I had to do the right thing, even if it meant risking my job. Weeks passed, and nothing seemed to change. I started to wonder if my report had been buried, or worse, ignored. Then, one morning, the company announced an internal audit. Rumors spread like wildfire, and it wasn't long before Greg and a few others were quietly let go. No explanation was given, of course, just the standard corporate pursuing other opportunities line. I never heard anything official about the fraud, but I knew my report had triggered something. The company moved on, and so did I. But the whole experience left me shaken. It's scary how close I came to getting caught up in something illegal without even realizing it. And all because I made one innocent mistake, looking too closely at the numbers. Now, I double-check everything, and I keep my head down even more. You never know what kind of secrets are lurking just beneath the surface of your everyday job. So, yeah. That's my story. Be careful out there, Reddit. You never know when you might stumble onto something that could change everything. Third story. I never signed up for this. I'm Ethan, 29 years old, and I've been living in this apartment building for about 2 years. It's nothing special, just a basic, run-of-the-mill place in the middle of the city. But somehow, over the past year, I've unintentionally become the person everyone in the building turns to whenever something weird or out of the ordinary happens. I didn't even notice it at first, but now it feels like I'm the unofficial fixer around here. Let me tell you how it all started. It began one Friday evening about a year ago. I was just settling into the couch with a pizza, ready to binge-watch some show, when I got a knock on my door. It was Mrs. Thompson, my elderly neighbor from down the hall. She's in her 70s, sharp as a tack, but a bit frail, and always baking something. Her brownies are famous around the building. "Ethan, I hate to bother you," she started, looking genuinely concerned, "but my smoke detector keeps going off, and I can't figure out why." Now, I'm not exactly a handyman, but I figured this was a simple fix. I grabbed a chair, walked over to her apartment, and checked out the smoke detector. Sure enough, the battery was dying, causing it to chirp. Easy enough, I changed the battery, tested it, and that was that. Mrs. Thompson thanked me with a plate of cookies, which, by the way, were incredible. I didn't think much of it. But then, a couple of days later, my downstairs neighbor, Todd, knocked on my door. Todd's in his early 30s, works from home, and has a serious obsession with houseplants. He came to me, looking slightly embarrassed, asking if I could help him figure out why his Wi-Fi kept cutting out. He'd already called the internet company twice, but they couldn't pinpoint the issue. So, I went downstairs and started troubleshooting. After some trial and error, I discovered that one of Todd's many plant humidifiers was causing interference with his router's signal. Who knew that could even happen? We moved the humidifier, and bam, Wi-Fi was back to full strength. Todd was so relieved he insisted on buying me dinner. This pattern kept repeating over the following months. Little issues would pop up around the building, and somehow, word got out that I was the guy who could help. It started small: light bulbs, leaky faucets, resetting routers, stuff like that. I wasn't an expert in any of this, but I guess I was just handy enough to figure it out. And, honestly, it felt kind of nice to be the go-to person. But then things started to get weird. One night, at around 2 a.m., I got a frantic knock on my door. It was Kevin from the 4th floor. He's a quiet guy, mid-40s, keeps to himself. I had barely spoken to him before this. He was in his pajamas, looking pale as a ghost. "Ethan, I think there's something in my bathroom." I blinked, still half asleep. Something? Like an animal. Now, I'm not a fan of anything that scurries, flies, or crawls, especially at 2 in the morning, but Kevin looked genuinely freaked out. So, I grabbed a flashlight, pulled on some shoes, and followed him up to his place. Sure enough, when we got to his bathroom, I heard rustling inside the wall. I immediately thought it was a rat, which grossed me out, but I didn't want to leave the guy hanging. After a bit of listening, I figured it was probably stuck in the ventilation system. I suggested he call pest control in the morning, but Kevin wasn't having it. "I can't sleep knowing that thing's in there," he said. So, I grabbed a broom, unscrewed the vent cover, and to my surprise, out flew a small bird. Not a rat, thank God. The bird had somehow gotten trapped and was desperately trying to escape. After some chaotic flapping and a lot of me waving the broom around like a maniac, we managed to guide it out the window. Kevin was beyond grateful. I was just glad I didn't have to deal with a rat. After that, things escalated. Word spread that I had rescued Kevin from a bird situation, and suddenly people thought I could handle any bizarre problem. One afternoon, Janine, who lives on the 2nd floor, asked me to help her find out why her refrigerator was making a strange humming noise. Turns out she had a magnet stuck in the back that was causing the vibration. Problem solved. Another time, Mike, the guy in 3B, asked me to look at his air conditioner, which was leaking water. I googled a few solutions, cleaned out the drain line, and fixed it. It wasn't just the residents, either. The building super, Larry, a laid-back guy who only shows up when there's a serious plumbing issue, started asking me to keep an eye on things when he wasn't around. I'm not sure why he thought I was qualified for that, but I guess after all the fixes, I had earned some kind of reputation. But the craziest situation by far happened just last month. I was sitting in my apartment, enjoying a quiet Saturday afternoon, when the fire alarm went off for the whole building. It wasn't one of those random false alarms either, this was the real deal. I grabbed my stuff and rushed outside like everyone else. Except, no one could figure out why the alarm had gone off. There was no fire, no smoke, nothing. The fire department showed up, checked everything, and eventually reset the system. But the alarm went off again, twice more in the next few days. After the 3rd time, Larry called me, saying, "Hey, Ethan, I know this is weird, but could you help me figure out what's tripping the alarm?" The fire department said the system's fine. I didn't know squat about fire alarms, but at this point, I was too deep into this fixer role to back out. So, I did some investigating. I walked through the entire building, checking every floor, talking to residents. And then, on the 3rd floor, I found the culprit, Janine's faulty toaster. For some reason, every time she used it, the electrical panel freaked out, triggering the alarm system. How that happens, I still don't fully understand, but we replaced her toaster, and the alarm stopped. After that, I realized I needed to start setting some boundaries. Don't get me wrong, I don't mind helping out every now and then, but I didn't move into this apartment building to become its unofficial handyman and problem solver. These days, I'm more selective about who I help, and I've made it clear to Larry that I'm not his assistant. So, yeah, that's how I accidentally became the go-to guy for all the weird problems in my apartment building. I still get the occasional knock on my door, but now I take it with a grain of salt. Sometimes, I'll help, sometimes I won't. but at least I've got some wild stories to tell.